worst part wasn't finding my husband eating our neighbor. It was that when Ryan looked up at me, face slick with gore, fingers buried wrist-deep in Mr. Abernathy's ruptured abdomen, I could still see him behind those changed eyes. Not completely gone, still there, watching himself from somewhere deep inside as his transformed body tore another chunk from the old man's exposed liver. This couldn't be happening. Not in our suburban home with its IKEA furniture and framed vacation photos. Not on our cream-colored carpet that I'd just had professionally cleaned last week. Not to Ryan, who apologized to spiders before taking them outside, who cried at sad commercials, who'd spent last weekend building a garden bench for my birthday. Yet here he was, crouched over Mr. Abernathy's mutilated corpse, his body grotesquely transformed. His shoulders had broadened, stretched his blood-soaked Harvard sweatshirt to its limits. Coarse, dark hair sprouted in patches across his exposed skin. His face, God, his face, had elongated into something between man and wolf, jaw distended to accommodate rows of gleaming fangs. When he saw me standing frozen in the doorway, grocery bags still clutched in my trembling hands, he made a sound I'll never forget, a whimper that became a growl that became something like my name. Bizis. A Betheth. The grocery bags hit the floor. A jar of pasta sauce shattered, spreading across the hardwood like arterial spray. Ryan's head tilted at the sound, too fluid, too animal. Then he looked down at what remained of our 68-year-old neighbor, the retired high school math teacher who'd brought us a homemade lasagna when we first moved in, and something like recognition flickered across his inhuman features. Horror, confusion, and hunger. Still so much hunger. I should have run, should have slammed the door and fled. Instead, my body carried me forward on legs that felt disconnected from my brain. "Ryan?" My voice emerged as barely a whisper. "Baby, what happened to you?" His massive form shuddered. Bones shifted visibly beneath his skin. When he spoke again, each word seemed to cause him physical pain. "Don't know. Woke up like this. So hungry." His clawed hands clenched in Mr. Abernathy's ruined torso. Couldn't stop. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers, but before I could dial 911, Ryan's head snapped up. His nostrils flared, and his eyes, still recognizably his, that same warm brown now swimming in pools of amber, went wide with panic. "Run," he rasped, body convulsing, getting worse. Can't control. His back arched unnaturally as bones cracked and realigned. Run. But I couldn't move, couldn't process what I was seeing, as my husband's transformation accelerated. His Harvard sweatshirt split along the seams, as his torso elongated and broadened. The sickening sound of cartilage tearing and reforming filled the room. His hands, those gentle hands that had held mine through 2 miscarriages and my father's funeral, lengthened into monstrous paws, each finger tipped with a curved yellowed claw. Then came the most horrific part. His face, his skull audibly cracked as it reshaped itself. His jaw jutted forward with a wet, tearing sound. Teeth pushed through his bleeding gums, replacing human dentition with savage fangs designed for ripping flesh. The agonized scream that tore from his throat became deeper, wilder, until it was no longer a scream at all, but a howl that made the windows vibrate. Where my husband had been now crouched something else entirely. Nearly 7 feet of muscle and fur and predatory intent. Only those eyes remained, holding the last fragments of the man I loved. Even as the rational part of my brain screamed in denial, another part, some primitive survival mechanism, finally kicked in. I stumbled backward toward the door. Too late. The creature that had been Ryan lunged forward with impossible speed. I felt a white-hot flash of pain as claws raked across my shoulder, tearing through sweater and skin alike. The impact sent me sprawling across the floor, the copper taste of blood filling my mouth as my head struck the hardwood. Through blurring vision, I watched the beast pause, bringing its bloodied claws to its muzzle. It inhaled deeply, tasting my blood, and made a sound almost like a sob. Then it turned and crashed through our bay window in an explosion of glass and splintered wood, vanishing into the gathering dusk. I lay there bleeding on our dining room floor, with Mr. Abernathy's eviscerated corpse just feet away, trying to make sense of the impossible. My husband had become a werewolf, and he just disappeared into suburban Sacramento with the hunger still on him. The police didn't believe me, of course. "Mrs. Chen, you're in shock," Detective Ramirez said gently as the EMT finished bandaging my shoulder in the back of the ambulance. "You've experienced a severe trauma. The mind can play tricks." "I know what I saw," I insisted, my voice hoarse from repeating the same story for the past 2 hours. "It was Ryan, but changed. Something happened to him." Ramirez exchanged a glance with his partner, the same look the emergency dispatcher had given me when I'd finally managed to call 911, babbling about werewolves and transformations. "Your husband attacked your neighbor and then assaulted you," Ramirez said carefully. "We're going to find him. But what you're describing," he shook his head. "People don't transform into animals, Mrs. Chen." "Then how do you explain what happened to Mr. Abernathy?" I demanded. The detective's expression darkened. "We've seen this kind of violence before. Bath salts, PCP, methamphetamine, they can cause extreme aggression, superhuman strength, even cannibalistic behavior. Ryan doesn't do drugs," I said flatly. "He has a smoothie and takes a Claritin. That's it." "Sometimes we don't know everything about the people we love," his partner offered, not unkindly. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted beyond words. They weren't going to believe me. Why would they? If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it either. "We'll need you to come to the station to give a formal statement," Ramirez continued. "And we strongly recommend you stay somewhere else tonight. Is there someone you can call?" I thought of my sister in Oakland, my co-workers at the architectural firm. How exactly would that conversation go? "Hey, can I crash at your place? My husband turned into a monster and ate our neighbor, and I'm worried he might come back for seconds." "I'll get a hotel," I said finally. As the EMT helped me down from the ambulance, a commotion near the police cordon caught my attention. A crowd of neighbors had gathered, held back by uniformed officers, but one woman was pushing her way through. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in medical scrubs. "That's my husband," she was shouting. "Gerald Abernathy is my husband." My stomach lurched. Carol Abernathy. I'd borrowed eggs from her just last week. Before I could process what I was doing, I was moving toward her. An officer tried to intercept me, but I ducked past him. "Carol," I called out. She turned, her face tear-streaked and confused as she recognized me. "Elizabeth, what's happening? They won't let me see Gerald. They're saying—" Her voice broke. "They're saying he's dead." "I'm so sorry," I whispered, reaching for her hand. She flinched away, eyes widening as she took in my blood-stained clothes, the bandages visible beneath my torn sweater. "You're hurt. Did you see what happened?" I hesitated. What could I possibly say? In the end, I nodded. "Was it—" She swallowed hard. "Was it Ryan?" The officers mentioned Ryan. "Yes," I admitted, but he wasn't himself. Something hardened in Carol's expression. "What does that mean? Was he drunk? On drugs?" "No, nothing like that. Something happened to him. Something I can't explain." I could hear how desperate, how crazy I sounded. "Carol, you know Ryan. You know he would never—" "My husband is dead," she said, her voice suddenly flat. "They're telling me his insides were torn out, that he was partially eaten." Her eyes bore into mine. "So don't tell me what Ryan would never do. Whatever he did, whatever caused it, my Gerald is gone." I had no answer for that. She was right. "Mrs. Abernathy?" Detective Ramirez appeared at my side. "I'm very sorry for your loss. If you'll come with me, we have some questions and we'll need you to formally identify." "Of course," she said mechanically, allowing herself to be led away. At the last moment, she turned back to me. "I hope they find him, Elizabeth. I hope they make him pay for what he did to my Gerald." As I watched her disappear into the chaos of police vehicles and crime scene technicians, a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the November air. She was right. They needed to find Ryan, because despite what the police thought, this wasn't drugs or a psychotic break. I knew what I'd seen, and if I was right, there would be more bodies before the night was through. I needed to find him first. The first reports of animal attacks came in shortly after midnight. I was sitting in a sterile hotel room 10 miles from our neighborhood, obsessively refreshing local news sites and police scanner apps on my phone. The initial headlines were vague. Large animal sighted in East Sacramento. Possible mountain lion attack in Folsom. 3 hospitalized after encounter with unidentified predator. But the details painted a clearer picture. Witnesses described an impossibly large, wolf-like creature walking on 2 legs. Victims who survived their encounters spoke of human-like intelligence in its eyes, and the attacks were moving in a clear pattern, heading east toward the Sierra Nevada foothills. Ryan was moving away from populated areas. Even in his transformed state, some part of him was trying to minimize the damage. I paced the small room, mind racing. The official statement from Sacramento PD identified Ryan as a person of interest in a homicide investigation, armed and dangerous, possibly experiencing a drug-induced psychosis. They urged the public not to approach him but to call 911 immediately if spotted. They had no idea what they were dealing with. I jumped as my phone rang, an unknown number lighting up the screen. For one wild moment I thought it might be Ryan, somehow managing to call despite his transformed state. Instead, a vaguely familiar female voice came through the speaker. "Elizabeth? It's Naomi Wright, from the university." It took me a moment to place her. Ryan's colleague from the anthropology department, the new adjunct professor he'd been helping acclimatize. We'd had her over for dinner once, a tall woman with prematurely gray hair and intense eyes. "Naomi? How did you get my number?" "Department directory. Listen, I know this is going to sound insane, but I need to talk to you about Ryan, about what's happening to him." My breath caught. "The police think he's on drugs, that he had some kind of psychotic break." "We both know that's not true." Her voice was deadly serious. "I need to see you in person, Elizabeth. It's not safe to talk over the phone." Warning bells went off in my head. "How do you know what's happening?" A long pause. "Because I've seen it before," she finally said. "And I may be the only person who can help him and keep more people from dying. Meet me at Mercy Hospital in an hour. I'll be in the cafeteria." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my phone, conflicted. This could be a trap. For all I knew, Naomi could be working with the police, trying to draw me out in hopes I'd lead them to Ryan. Or worse, she could be some kind of thrill seeker, fascinated by the gruesome crimes my husband was suspected of committing. But if there was even a chance she knew something, anything, that could explain what had happened to Ryan, I grabbed my car keys. Mercy Hospital's cafeteria was nearly deserted at 1:30 a.m., populated only by a few exhausted-looking residents and nurses grabbing coffee between shifts. Naomi sat alone in a corner booth, her back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the entrance. When she saw me, she didn't wave or call out, just nodded once. Tersely. As I approached, I was struck by how different she looked from the friendly, somewhat scattered academic who'd complimented my paella recipe 2 months ago. Her face was drawn, dark circles under her eyes, and she carried herself with a hyper-vigilant tension. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the booth across from her. "I know you have no reason to trust me." "You said you could help Ryan." She nodded, then surprised me by reaching across the table and grasping my wrist, turning it over to examine the underside of my forearm. "He attacked you. Did he break the skin?" I pulled my arm back, unsettled. "He scratched my shoulder. The EMTs cleaned and bandaged it." "Show me." "Excuse me?" Naomi leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "This is life or death, Elizabeth. I need to see the wound." After a moment's hesitation, I pulled down the collar of my shirt, exposing the edge of the bandage on my shoulder. Naomi's expression grew even more serious. "When did this happen? Exactly what time?" "I don't know. Around 5:30. What does this have to do with—" And you're sure it was after he had already transformed? He was fully changed when he injured you? Yes, I said, my patience wearing thin. Now, can you please tell me what the hell is going on? How do you know about any of this? Naomi sat back, running a hand through her gray hair. Because I'm the reason it's happening. The confession hung between us for a long moment. What? I finally managed. Not intentionally, she clarified quickly. But the artifact Ryan was helping me analyze, I warned the university it needed specialized handling. They didn't listen. Artifact? What artifact? Naomi pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, then slid it across the table to me. The image showed what appeared to be an ancient stone amulet, roughly circular, etched with primitive symbols surrounding a central figure, a humanoid shape with a wolf's head. It's called the Lycion stone, Naomi explained. Allegedly created in pre-Roman Arcadia. Most academics consider it a medieval forgery, but my research suggests it's authentic and dangerous. I stared at her incredulous. You seriously suggesting a piece of rock turned my husband into a werewolf? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you exactly what happened. Naomi's expression was deadly serious. The Lycion stone carries a curse, or a disease depending on how you want to frame it. Direct contact with the blood grooves triggers the transformation in susceptible individuals. Blood grooves? The recessed channels in the carving, originally used for ritual sacrifice. When Ryan was helping me document the artifact Tuesday afternoon, he cut his finger on one of the edges. It was a small cut, but it was enough. Tuesday, 3 days ago. I remembered Ryan coming home complaining about a paper cut that wouldn't stop bleeding. This is insane, I said, but without much conviction. After what I'd witnessed, I was running out of skepticism. 3 nights ago, he would have experienced the first symptoms, Naomi continued. Fever, increased appetite, sensitivity to light and sound, vivid dreams. Last night, partial transformation. Heightened senses, increased aggression, physical changes that could still be hidden or explained away. My mind flashed to Ryan's behavior over the past few days, the way he demolished 3 steaks at dinner the night before, how he'd flinched at the sound of our neighbor's leaf blower, the strange way he'd tossed and turned all night, mumbling in his sleep. And tonight? I asked, already knowing the answer. The 3rd night brings the first complete transformation, uncontrollable hunger. The human mind is still there, but buried beneath overwhelming primal instincts. He recognized me, I whispered. He told me to run. Naomi nodded grimly. The man you know is still in there, fighting for control. But each time he transforms, a little more of his humanity will be eroded, until eventually... Eventually what? Until there's nothing left of Ryan at all. Just the beast. The fluorescent lights of the cafeteria suddenly seemed too bright. The antiseptic hospital smell too strong. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. How do we stop it? I demanded. How do we change him back? Naomi's expression told me everything before she even spoke. The lore surrounding the Lycaon stone is incomplete. Most who encountered it didn't survive to document a cure. But there must be something. There are theories. She hesitated. Some texts suggest the curse can be broken if the transformed person consumes the heart of the one who infected them. That would be you. Yes, her level gaze never wavered. I'm aware of the irony. Are there other options? A few, equally grim. Silver is mentioned, of course. The folklore got that much right, but not as a bullet or weapon. The texts describe a ritual involving liquid silver being consumed by the afflicted during the waning moon. Consumed? As in drink liquid silver? Yes. Which would almost certainly be fatal to a normal human. I let out a shaky breath. So either Ryan dies, or he remains a monster forever. Or he kills me and maybe breaks the curse, Naomi added with grim humor. I'm not particularly fond of that option either. She leaned forward. But there's one more thing the texts mention, something relevant to you specifically. What? Your wound. You were injured by him after he transformed, correct? I nodded, a new fear dawning as I understood her implication. The curse is transmitted through blood contact. if his blood or saliva entered your wound. I'll become like him, I finished, my voice hollow. On the next full moon, yes. The cycle would begin for you. I touched my bandaged shoulder, remembering the EMT's words. Nasty lacerations, but you got lucky. They're not too deep. Lucky. Right. When is the next full moon? 19 days from now. Less than 3 weeks. Less than 3 weeks to save Ryan, and possibly myself. What do we do now? I asked, my mind still reeling. First, we find Ryan, before the police or some overzealous civilian with a hunting rifle does. The transformation should recede at dawn, leaving him human again, exhausted and likely with limited memory of what happened while changed. He'll be vulnerable, confused. And then, Naomi's expression was grim. Then, we decide which terrible option is our best chance of saving what's left of your husband, before the sun sets again and the beast returns. Finding Ryan proved easier than expected and infinitely more heartbreaking. As dawn broke over the Sierra foothills, Naomi and I followed news reports of the creature's path eastward. The attacks had stopped about 2 hours earlier, whether because Ryan had satisfied his hunger or because he'd gained enough control to stop himself, I couldn't bear to speculate. We found his discarded, blood-soaked Harvard sweatshirt first, torn and abandoned on a hiking trail. Then droplets of blood leading away from the path into dense underbrush. And finally, in a shallow cave formed by fallen granite boulders, we found Ryan himself. He lay curled in a fetal position, naked and shivering, his body once again fully human. Dried blood caked his hands and face, crusted beneath his fingernails and in his hair. As the beam of my flashlight fell across him, he whimpered and tried to shield his eyes. "Ryan?" I called softly, my heart breaking at the sight of him. "It's me. It's Elizabeth." He lowered his arms slowly, blinking up at us in confusion. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by horror. "Oh, God!" he whispered, looking down at his blood-covered hands. "It wasn't a nightmare. It was real. I killed—" His voice broke. "Oh, Mr. Abernathy, I killed him. I ate." He lurched to the side and vomited violently, his entire body convulsing. I rushed to him, instinct overriding caution, and gathered him in my arms despite the gore that covered him. He felt burning hot, feverish, but undeniably human. "I hurt you," he sobbed against my shoulder. "I saw myself do it, but I couldn't stop. It was like watching through someone else's eyes while they controlled my body." "It's not your fault," I said fiercely. "You're sick. We're going to help you." Ryan finally seemed to notice Naomi standing a few feet away, watching us warily. "Dr. Wright, what are you doing here?" Naomi stepped forward, her expression a complex mixture of guilt and determination. "I'm here because I'm responsible for your condition, Dr. Chen, and I may be the only one who can help you understand what's happening." As the sun rose higher, Naomi explained everything to Ryan. The Lycaon stone, the curse, the 3/9 progression of his transformation. With each revelation, my husband seemed to fold further into himself, as if trying to physically disappear. "I remember everything," he said hollowly when she finished. "Every person He couldn't complete the sentence. There were 5, after Mr. Abernathy, a homeless man near the river, a teenage couple parked in a car, a man walking his dog. "It wasn't you," I insisted, but the words sounded hollow even to me. "It was me," Ryan contradicted, his voice flat. "I was aware the entire time. I just couldn't stop myself. The hunger was overwhelming." "The police are looking for you," Naomi said. "They think you're experiencing drug-induced psychosis." A bitter laugh escaped him. "If only." "We need to get you somewhere safe," I said. "Somewhere you can be contained when night falls." Ryan's head snapped up, eyes wide with fresh horror. "It's going to happen again tonight?" Naomi nodded grimly. "Every night from now on, and each time, the human part of your consciousness will have less and less control." "No." Ryan shook his head violently. "No, I can't go through that again. I can't kill more people. I won't. He looked at me with desperate intensity. You have to stop me. That's what we're trying to do, I began, but he cut me off. No. You have to stop me, permanently. I recoiled as his meaning became clear. Ryan, no. Yes, he insisted, grabbing my arms. Listen to me, Elizabeth. I felt everything I did last night. I was aware as I tore that couple apart. I heard them screaming, begging, and part of me, God help me, part of me enjoyed it. His grip tightened painfully. I can't live with that. I won't be responsible for more deaths. There are options, Naomi interjected. Difficult ones, but... I heard you talking about them at the cave entrance, Ryan interrupted. Drinking liquid silver? Eating your heart? These aren't solutions. They're desperate grasping at mythological straws. We'll find another way, I insisted. Ryan released me and stood up shakily, wrapping his arms around his blood-crusted torso. We're out of time. Tonight. I'll change again. More people will die. His voice broke. I can't bear it, Elizabeth. I can't bear being trapped inside that thing as it kills. I wanted to argue, to tell him we'd find a way, but the haunted look in his eyes stopped me. Whatever he'd experienced during his transformation, being fully conscious while his body committed atrocities, had broken something fundamental inside him. What do you want to do? I finally asked, hating the question even as I voiced it. Ryan looked between us, then out at the brightening day. First, I need to wash this blood off. Then I need to turn myself into the police. What? I gasped. Ryan, they'll lock you up. When you transform. Exactly. They'll have me in a cell, surrounded by armed officers. When I change, they'll have no choice but to... He couldn't finish the sentence. That's suicide by cop, Naomi said bluntly. It's the only way to guarantee I don't hurt anyone else. I stepped forward, taking his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. We have almost 12 hours until sunset. Give us that time to find another solution. Please, Ryan. For me. He closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against mine. 12 hours, he agreed finally. But if we don't find a better answer by then, I'm walking into the police station, and you have to let me... I nodded, though everything inside me rebelled at the promise. 12 hours. As the morning sun illuminated the blood caked beneath my husband's fingernails, I silently vowed to find a solution that didn't end with Ryan's death, even if I had to risk my own life in the process. What I didn't know then was that we were being watched. Someone else had been tracking Ryan's movements all night. Someone who had their own plans for the werewolf my husband had become, and they were closing in. We managed to get Ryan back to Naomi's secluded cabin in the foothills without being spotted, though there were a few close calls. As Ryan showered, scrubbing away the evidence of his night of slaughter, Naomi and I sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by ancient tomes and printouts of obscure academic papers. There must be another option, I insisted, scanning a passage about European werewolf cases from the 1700s, something we've missed. Naomi rubbed her temples, looking exhausted. The accounts are inconsistent and often contradictory. Some suggest wolfsbane as a remedy, others moonstone. One text claims baptism in running water under a new moon will break the curse. Another insists only beheading with a silver blade will truly end it. What about this? I pointed to a mention of a supposed cure involving a potion made from the blood of 7 virgins mixed with powdered silver and wolfsbane. Naomi gave me a flat look. First, I'm not sure where we'd find 7 virgins willing to donate blood in rural California. Second, these cures were typically invented by the same people who believed in witches and demonic possession. They're not exactly reliable medical sources. Says the anthropologist who believes in werewolves, I shot back. I believe in what I've seen, she replied evenly. And what I see is that the Lycaon Stone's curse is real, whether we frame it as supernatural or as some unknown pathogen that alters human DNA. The bathroom door opened, and Ryan emerged, dressed in clothes Naomi had provided, a flannel shirt and jeans that were slightly too small for his 6'2" frame. His hair was still damp, his face pale but clean. Without the blood coating his skin, he could almost pass for his normal self, except for a feverish gleam in his eyes and an unnatural tension in his movements, as if he was barely containing something violent beneath the surface. "Find anything?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Nothing concrete," Naomi admitted. "But I've been thinking, the transformation is triggered by moonlight, right? What if we completely isolate you from it? A windowless room sealed against even the faintest ray." Ryan shook his head. "I don't think it works that way. Last night I started changing before the moon even rose. I could feel it building all day, like pressure behind my eyes. By sunset, it was inevitable. We need to contain you somehow," I said. "Somewhere you can't hurt anyone when you change." Ryan's laugh was bitter. "You saw what I became, Elizabeth. I tore through a solid oak door like it was cardboard, ripped a man apart with my bare hands. What exactly do you think would hold me?" The hopelessness in his voice cut through me. I reached for his hand across the table, but he pulled away, unwilling to accept comfort he felt he didn't deserve. "There is something else we should consider," Naomi said quietly. "The silver consumption ritual. It might not be as immediately fatal as we first thought." Ryan's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Naomi indicated a weathered journal on the table. "This account from 1887 describes a case in Bavaria. A man afflicted with lycanthropy was fed small amounts of colloidal silver over several days. He survived the treatment, though, with permanent side effects, argyria, discoloration of the skin. But the text claims the curse was broken. Or he died from silver poisoning and the writer embellished the story," I pointed out. "It's a risk," Naomi acknowledged, "but perhaps a calculated one. If we start with very small doses—" "How would we even get liquid silver?" Ryan interrupted. "I have contacts at metallurgical labs, people who don't ask too many questions." Ryan and I exchanged a look. For the first time since we'd found him, I saw a glimmer of something other than despair in his eyes. Hope, maybe. Or at least a willingness to try. "How quickly could you get it?" he asked. "By this afternoon, if I make some calls now?" Ryan nodded slowly. "Okay, we try the silver first. But," his expression hardened, "if it doesn't work, if I start to change again tonight, you need to be prepared to do whatever it takes to stop me." "Whatever it takes," he repeated, looking directly at me. I wanted to protest, to insist we'd find another way, but the memory of Mr. Abernathy's eviscerated body stopped me. The teenage couple, the homeless man, all dead because of what my husband had become. "I understand," I said finally. While Naomi made calls, Ryan and I sat in tense silence on the cabin's small porch, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Each passing hour brought us closer to sunset, closer to the moment of truth. "I'm sorry," Ryan said suddenly, breaking the silence. "For all of this, for putting you in danger." "You didn't do this," I reminded him. "It was an accident." Still, he stared out at the tree line, his expression distant. "I keep thinking about Carol, what she must be going through. Her husband of 40 years, and I tore him apart like an animal." His voice caught. "And the others, that couple was so young, probably just looking for a place to be alone together. They had their whole lives ahead of them. I had no words of comfort to offer. Nothing could undo what had happened. "If this doesn't work," Ryan continued after a moment, "I need you to promise me something." "Ryan, just listen." He turned to face me, his eyes feverishly bright. "If I can't be cured, if I have to end this, I don't want you to blame yourself. I don't want you to spend your life wondering if there was something else we could have tried." Tears pricked at my eyes. How could I not? Because I'm telling you now, while I'm still myself, that I'd rather die as Ryan Chen than live as that monster. That's my choice, my responsibility. He reached out, finally taking my hand. "Promise me you'll remember that." I tried to speak, but could only nod. Tears flowing freely now. Ryan squeezed my hand, then frowned, lifting it closer to his face. "What's this?" He was looking at my forearm, at 3 small red marks I hadn't noticed before. Tiny punctures, like pinpricks, forming a triangle. I don't know, I said, puzzled. I don't remember. A noise from the woods cut me off. A sharp crack, like a branch breaking under human weight. Ryan was on his feet instantly, his body tensing in a way that wasn't quite human. Someone's out there, he whispered, nostrils flaring. I can smell them. His eyes had changed. I realized with a jolt of fear the warm brown was bleeding into amber, pupils elongating into vertical slits. Ryan! I reached for him, but he jerked away. Stay back, he growled, the sound rumbling from deep in his chest. Something's happening. It's too early, but I can feel it starting. Before I could respond, a voice called from the tree line, female, confident. Dr. Chen! Dr. Wright! Please remain calm. We're here to help. A woman emerged from the forest, followed by two men in tactical gear. She was in her 50s, slim and silver-haired, dressed in an impeccable gray pantsuit that seemed wildly out of place in the wilderness. Despite her slight build, she radiated authority. Who the hell are you? I demanded, moving protectively toward Ryan, who had doubled over, hands braced on his knees, breathing heavily. Dr. Eleanor Crane, Department of Health and Human Services, the woman replied smoothly. Special Containment Division. There's no such division, Naomi said from the doorway behind us, her voice tight with suspicion. Dr. Crane smiled thinly. Not officially, no. But I assure you we're quite real. She gestured to Ryan, who was now on his knees, body trembling violently. And we're your husband's best chance of survival, Mrs. Chen. How do you know about us? I demanded. How did you find us? We've been monitoring situations involving the Lycaon stone for decades, Crane replied. When it surfaced at Sacramento State, we placed tracking devices on everyone who came into contact with it, including you, Mrs. Chen. She nodded to my forearm, where the 3 small punctures formed their triangle. Standard protocol. Ryan let out an agonized groan, drawing everyone's attention. His shoulders were beginning to expand beneath the flannel shirt, the fabric straining as his muscles contorted. It's too early, Naomi protested. The transformation shouldn't begin until sunset. The cycle accelerates with each occurrence, Crane explained clinically. By the 5th or 6th day, the afflicted becomes capable of transforming at will. She turned to the men beside her. Administer the sedative. Full dose. No, I stepped between them and Ryan. You're not touching him. Mrs. Chen, your husband is about to transform into something that will kill all of us without hesitation, Crane said, her calm never wavering. The sedative will slow the change. Keep him semi-conscious until we can get him to a secure facility. It's for his safety as well as ours. Behind me, Ryan's groans had turned to guttural snarls. I dared a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. His face was contorting, jaw elongating with audible cracking sounds as teeth pushed through his gums. His hands, braced on the porch floor, were stretching into clawed appendages, splintering the wooden boards beneath them. Elizabeth, he managed through a mouth that was rapidly becoming a muzzle. Let them. One of the tactical team members approached cautiously, a pneumatic injector in his gloved hand. I stepped aside, watching helplessly as he pressed the device against Ryan's straining neck and pulled the trigger with a soft hiss. The effect was immediate. Ryan's body went rigid, then slackened, collapsing to the porch. The transformation didn't reverse, but it seemed to pause. His features caught in a grotesque halfway state between human and beast. Team 2, bring in the transport, Crane said into a communicator at her wrist. Then, to Naomi and me, we have a facility specifically designed for cases like your husband's. Advanced containment protocols, medical research capabilities. You mean you've seen this before? Naomi said. It wasn't a question. The Lycaon stone isn't the only artifact of its kind, Dr. Wright. Nor is lycanthropy the only condition we monitor. Crane's clinical detachment slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. Our job is to contain these anomalies before the public becomes aware of them, before panic spreads. You're a cover-up operation, I realized. We're a specialized medical unit addressing rare pathological conditions, Crane corrected smoothly. And right now, we're your husband's only hope. As if on cue, a black van with government plates pulled up to the cabin. 4 more tactical team members emerged, unloading what looked like a reinforced glass and steel container mounted on wheels, a high-tech version of a cage. "You can't just take him," I protested, though I could hear the defeat in my own voice. "Actually, we can." Crane's smile never reached her eyes. "But we'd prefer your cooperation. You and Dr. Wright have valuable first-hand observations about the progression of Dr. Chen's condition. Your insights could be crucial to our research." "You mean you want us to help you experiment on him?" Naomi said flatly. "I mean, we want to cure him," Crane countered. "Just as you do. The difference is, we have the resources and experience to actually accomplish that goal." As the tactical team began loading Ryan's semi-transformed body into the containment unit, I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. Everything was happening too fast. These people had appeared out of nowhere, claiming authority I couldn't verify, taking my husband to a facility whose location I didn't know, and yet, what choice did I have? Ryan was changing, becoming more dangerous by the hour. If these people truly had the means to contain him, to possibly cure him— "I'm coming with you," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Crane nodded as if she'd expected nothing less. "Of course. Dr. Wright as well if she wishes." Naomi hesitated, glancing between me and the tactical team securing the containment unit in the van. "This feels like a monumentally bad idea," she muttered. "Probably," I agreed, "but it's the only one we've got." As we climbed into the unmarked van Ryan secured in the reinforced container, I couldn't shake the feeling we were making a terrible mistake. But watching my husband's half-transformed body twitch under the effects of the sedative, his face frozen in that hideous intermediate state, part man, part monster, I knew we'd run out of options. Whatever this special containment division was, whatever their true agenda might be, they represented Ryan's last hope. And mine. I just prayed we weren't jumping from the frying pan into the fire. The facility was nothing like I'd imagined. After a 2-hour drive, during which we were asked to wear blindfolds for security purposes, we arrived at what appeared to be an ordinary corporate office park, nestled in the Trinity Mountains. Only the reinforced checkpoint gate and armed guards hinted at something more sensitive than accounting or software development. Inside, however, was a different matter entirely. We descended 5 levels underground in a smooth, silent elevator, emerging into a state-of-the-art medical complex that would make any research hospital envious. Staff in white coats moved purposefully through wide corridors, barely glancing at our strange procession. 2 shell-shocked civilians accompanying a glass containment unit holding a half-transformed werewolf. Ryan remained in his bizarre, paused state of metamorphosis, neither fully human nor fully beast. The sedative had rendered him semi-conscious, his eyes half-lidded but occasionally tracking movement. His breathing labored through a partially elongated muzzle. "The holding wing is specifically designed for transformative anomalies," Dr. Crane explained as we walked. "Reinforced walls, atmospheric controls, 24/7 monitoring. Your husband will be comfortable but securely contained." "He's not dangerous in this state?" I asked, watching Ryan's clawed hand twitch against the glass. "The sedative suppresses the aggressive impulses associated with the transformation," Crane replied. "We've developed it specifically for cases involving lycanthropic mutations." "How many others are there?" Naomi asked. "Other werewolves, I mean." Crane's expression remained neutral. "That information is classified. But I can tell you Dr. Chen's case is not unique, just particularly advanced." We arrived at a large circular chamber with 6 glass-walled cells arranged around a central monitoring station. Only one other cell was occupied by something I couldn't quite make out, a hunched figure huddled in the corner, its features obscured by shadows. "Place him in cell 4, Crane instructed the tactical team. "Standard isolation protocols." As they transferred Ryan's container into the designated cell, I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't a hospital room, it was a prison cell, albeit a high-tech one. The realization must have shown on my face because Crane placed a hand on my arm, a gesture probably meant to be comforting but that felt distinctly clinical. "He'll receive the best possible care, Mrs. Chen. Our medical team has more experience with this condition than anyone else on the planet." "And what exactly does that care entail?" I asked, unable to keep the suspicion from my voice. First, stabilization, Crane replied. We'll maintain him in this suspended state while we run tests, blood work, tissue samples, neural mapping, then we'll begin the experimental treatment protocol, which is... For the first time, Crane hesitated. It's complex, and still in the development phase. You mean you don't have a cure? Naomi said flatly. Not yet, Crane admitted. But Dr. Chen's case represents our best opportunity to develop one. His transformation is remarkably complete, yet he's retained more cognitive function than most subjects in similar stages. Subjects, not patients. The word choice wasn't lost on me. I want to see your research, I said. All of it. I want to know exactly what you're planning to do to my husband. Crane studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Follow me to my office. There are some forms you'll need to sign first. Standard confidentiality agreements. But after that, I can show you the basics of our protocol. As we left the holding wing, I glanced back at Ryan in his glass cell. His amber eyes, more wolf than human now, followed me until the doors slid shut between us. Something in that gaze, a desperate pleading, a silent warning, made my skin crawl. Whatever was happening here, I was increasingly certain it wasn't as straightforward as Dr. Crane made it sound. You want to extract the virus and weaponize it, Naomi said flatly, her voice echoing in the sterile conference room where Crane had brought us after a perfunctory tour of the research levels. I stared at the document spread before us, hundreds of pages of research data, experimental logs, and theoretical models, all focused on what the facility called pathogen. What? Dr. Crane's smile tightened. That's an oversimplification, Dr. Wright. Our primary goal is to understand the mechanism of transformation, how a human subject can rapidly restructure their cellular makeup, increasing bone density and muscle mass while fundamentally altering their nervous system. The military applications are secondary. But they exist, I pressed. Of course they exist. This facility costs billions to operate. Defense contracts keep us funded. But that doesn't change the fact that we're offering your husband his best chance at survival. I wasn't so sure. The research before us painted a grim picture. Of the 12 previous subjects with confirmed lycanthropic infection, 9 had died during experimental treatments. 2 had been terminated due to containment concerns. Only 1 had survived longer than 6 months, and the notes on that case were heavily redacted. These mortality rates are unacceptable, I said, pushing away a particularly disturbing autopsy report. I won't let you experiment on Ryan like this. Mrs. Chen. Crane sighed. I understand your concern, but without intervention, your husband will become increasingly dangerous and decreasingly human. By our estimates, after 7 to 10 complete transformations, the original personality is irretrievably lost. The beast takes over permanently. I thought of Ryan's words on the porch. I'd rather die as Ryan Chen than live as that monster. What about the silver treatment? Naomi asked. The Bavarian case from 1887. Crane's expression shifted subtly. You've done your homework. Yes, colloidal silver has shown some promise in our trials, but the dosage required for full remission would almost certainly cause fatal artery in a normal human. Ryan's not exactly normal anymore, I pointed out. True, but the treatment would still carry an estimated 70% fatality risk. And your experimental protocol? Naomi asked. Currently, an 85% fatality risk, Crane admitted, though we believe Dr. Chen's unusually strong cognitive retention might improve those odds. I stood abruptly, unable to continue this cold statistical discussion of my husband's chances. I need to see him. Now. Crane hesitated, then nodded. Of course, but I should warn you, the sedative will be wearing off soon. He may begin actively transforming again. I don't care, I said. Take me to him. As we made our way back to the holding wing, I caught Naomi's eye. A silent communication passed between us. Whatever happened next, we were on the same page. We needed to get Ryan out of here. The question was how, and whether the man we knew would still exist by the time we figured it out. Ryan was awake when we entered, his amber eyes following our movement through the glass wall of his cell. The transformation had progressed despite the sedative. His face was now almost entirely lupine, a wolf's muzzle protruding from what had been human features. Coarse dark fur had spread across his exposed skin, and his hands had fully transformed into massive paws tipped with curved claws. But his eyes, God, his eyes, were still Ryan's somehow, filled with recognition and a desperate, pleading intelligence. "Can he understand us?" I asked Crane, who stood monitoring his vital signs from a control panel. "To an extent. The higher cognitive functions are compromised during transformation, but basic comprehension remains. You can try speaking to him." I approached the glass, placing my palm against its cool surface. "Ryan?" "It's me." "It's Elizabeth." A low rumble came from his throat, not quite a growl, but something more complex. He raised one massive paw, pressing it to the glass opposite my hand. The gesture was so human, so intentional, that tears sprang to my eyes. "We're going to help you," I promised. "We'll find a way to fix this." Behind me, Crane cleared her throat. "Mrs. Chen, there's something you should know about your husband's case. Something unique." I turned, suspicious of her timing. "The blood work we've run shows an anomaly we haven't seen in previous subjects. His cell structure is adapting to the pathogen rather than being overwhelmed by it. It's as if his body is finding a balance between human and transformed states." "What does that mean?" Naomi asked sharply. "It means he might be able to achieve conscious control of the transformation, eventually to change, at will, rather than being forced by the lunar cycle." Crane's clinical detachment slipped, revealing genuine scientific excitement. "It's unprecedented." A cold feeling settled in my stomach, and I suppose that makes him even more valuable as a research subject. Crane didn't deny it. "It makes him our best chance at understanding this condition, at developing treatments that might actually work." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Mrs. Chen, I understand your distrust, but we genuinely want to help your husband. By experimenting on him, by giving him a chance to be something other than a monster." Crane's gaze was steady. "The alternative is death, either by his own hand, as he suggested at the cabin, or by ours when he inevitably loses control completely." Before I could respond, an alarm blared, sudden and deafening. Red emergency lights began pulsing throughout the holding wing. "What's happening?" I demanded, instinctively moving closer to Ryan's cell. Crane was already at the control panel, fingers flying across the touchscreen. "Containment breach in Cell 6, she announced, her voice tight. "Security teams to the holding wing immediately." I turned towards Cell 6, the shadowed enclosure that had held the facility's other occupant. The glass wall was intact, but the cell was empty. "Where did it go?" Naomi asked, backing toward the entrance. A horrible suspicion formed in my mind. I looked up at the ceiling, where a maintenance hatch hung partially open. "It's in the ventilation system," I realized aloud. As if in response, a skittering sound came from above us. Rapid movement through the metal ducts overhead. Then silence. Crane hit a button on the control panel. "Full lockdown! All personnel clear the holding wing." "What was in that cell?" I demanded. "Classification Epsilon 7, Crane replied tersely. "Non-human entity. Highly adaptive predatory instincts." "That tells us nothing," Naomi snapped. "It tells you enough to know you need to evacuate. Now." Crane's professional calm had vanished, replaced by a rigid tension that scared me more than alarms. "Security will escort you to the safe zone." 2 armed guards appeared at the entrance, motioning for us to follow them. But I couldn't move, my eyes fixed on Ryan's cell. "We can't leave him," I protested. "Dr. Chen is secure in his cell," Crane assured me. "The entity can't breach the reinforced glass. He'll be perfectly safe." But Ryan didn't look reassured. He was pacing his enclosure, muscles bunched beneath his fur, head tilted as he tracked sounds we couldn't hear. Something about his posture, a predatory readiness, made me think he sensed danger that we didn't. "Elizabeth!" Naomi caught my arm. We need to go, now. Reluctantly, I allowed myself to be pulled toward the exit. At the last moment, I looked back at Ryan, our eyes meeting through the glass. "I'll come back for you," I mouthed silently. Whether he understood or not, I couldn't tell. But as the security doors sealed behind us, locking him in with whatever had escaped, I felt something inside me harden into resolve. I would not leave this facility without my husband, whatever form he might take. The safe zone turned out to be a windowless conference room 3 levels up from the holding wing, where a dozen increasingly anxious staff members huddled around a live security feed of the containment area. "What exactly are we dealing with?" Naomi demanded, addressing a nervous-looking technician monitoring the video screens. "I'm not cleared to discuss," he began, but I cut him off. "My husband is locked down there with whatever it is. I think we deserve to know." The technician glanced at his colleagues, receiving subtle nods of encouragement, then sighed. "It's a skinwalker, Native American origin, brought in 3 weeks ago after killing 7 people on a Navajo reservation." "A skinwalker," Naomi repeated, her academic interest visibly piqued despite the circumstances. "A shapeshifter, then?" "Not exactly. It doesn't change its physical form. It steals the forms of others through consumption." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, consumption?" The technician looked distinctly uncomfortable. "It eats its victims, but not for sustenance. It consumes specific organs, brain, heart, liver, and incorporates aspects of the victim into itself, physical traits, memories, even personality fragments." "And you kept this thing in a glass cell?" I asked incredulously. "The cell was specifically designed to contain it," he defended. "Triple-layered polycarbonate? With electromagnetic shielding? It shouldn't have been able to escape." "Shouldn't," Naomi echoed flatly. On the monitor, tactical teams in full body armor were sweeping the holding wing, weapons raised. Ryan remained visible in his cell, agitated but contained. Of the escaped entity there was no sign. "Why hasn't Dr. Crane returned?" I asked, suddenly aware of her absence. The technician exchanged nervous glances with his colleagues again. "She went to the director's office to report the breach. Standard protocol." Something about his tone set off warning bells. And she hasn't checked in. Her tracker shows she's still in the elevator between levels." A horrible thought struck me. "The ventilation system connects to the elevators, doesn't it?" The blood drained from the technician's face. He turned back to the monitors, fingers flying across the keyboard to bring up a different camera feed. The interior of an elevator appeared on screen, its emergency lights casting an eerie red glow over the small space. It was empty, but on the floor lay a woman's shoe, a tasteful gray pump matching the suit Dr. Crane had worn. Next to it, a dark smear that could only be blood. "Oh, God," someone whispered. The technician hit the intercom. "Security Command, this is Safe Zone B. We have a situation. Dr. Crane's tracker is in Elevator 3, but she's not responding." "Visual confirmation of blood on scene." A tense voice responded through the speaker. "Acknowledged. Security teams are being diverted to investigate. Maintain lockdown protocols." "That thing took her," Naomi said quietly beside me. "It's... what? Absorbing her somehow?" "If it has, we're in serious trouble," the technician murmured. "Dr. Crane has level 5 clearance, access to every secure area in the facility." While the others digested this grim news, my attention remained fixed on the monitor showing Ryan's cell. He'd stopped pacing and was now pressed against the glass, head cocked as if listening intently. As I watched, his head snapped toward the ceiling, amber eyes tracking something we couldn't see. "There," I pointed. Ryan senses something in the holding wing. The technician zoomed in the camera feed, focusing on the area above Ryan's cell. For a moment, nothing seemed amiss. Then, at the edge of the frame, a shadow moved, fluid and unnaturally quick. "It's back," someone whispered. The tactical team hadn't noticed yet, their attention focused on the far side of the holding wing, but Ryan had. He was tracking the movement, a low growl visibly rumbling through his transformed body. "We need to warn them," I said urgently. The technician hit a button on the console. "Security Team Alpha, movement detected near Cell 4, possible Epsilon 7 contact. Too late." On screen, the shadow detached from the ceiling, dropping with impossible grace directly onto one of the armored team members. There was a brief, violent struggle, and then, horrifically, the shadow seemed to flow over the soldier, enveloping him completely. When it pulled back, the man lay motionless, his tactical helmet shattered to reveal a ruined skull, the contents partially missing. "It's feeding," the technician said numbly, consuming his brain to access his knowledge. The remaining tactical team opened fire on the creature, but it moved with uncanny speed, scaling the wall and disappearing into the ventilation system again. The guards gathered around their fallen comrade, weapons trained on the ceiling. "They need to get out of there," Naomi said. "That thing is learning, adapting." A new alarm cut her off. Different from the containment breach warning, more urgent. "What now?" I demanded. The technician's face went ashen as he checked his display. "Cell 4, power, failure. The electromagnetic locks are offline." My eyes snapped to the monitor showing Ryan's enclosure. The lights inside had gone out, but the emergency backup illumination showed him standing motionless in the center of the cell, head tilted upward toward the camera. As we watched, he placed one massive paw against the glass door, testing it. The door slid open. "Oh shit!" someone breathed. "Security to the holding wing," the technician shouted into the intercom. "Cell 4 breach, werewolf containment failure." But the tactical team's attention was fixed on the ventilation ducts, their backs to Ryan's now open cell. They didn't see him step through the doorway, his movements deliberate, almost graceful despite his monstrous form. I caught my breath, certain I was about to watch my transformed husband tear through the unsuspecting soldiers. But Ryan didn't attack. Instead, he tilted his head back, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. Then, with shocking purpose, he leaped upward, powerful hind legs propelling him to the ceiling, where his claws dug into the same ventilation duct the skinwalker had disappeared into. With one powerful wrench, he tore the metal grate free and pulled himself into the duct. "What is he doing?" Naomi breathed beside me. "He's hunting," I realized. "He's hunting the skinwalker." The security team had finally noticed Ryan's escape and were now shouting into their radio, but they seemed reluctant to pursue him into the narrow confines of the ventilation system. Not that I blamed them. My mind raced. Ryan was loose in the facility, transformed and potentially dangerous. But he'd ignored the armed humans in favor of pursuing the escaped creature. Was some part of him, the human part, still in control? Or was this simply predatory instinct, one apex hunter challenging another? Either way, the facility had become a battleground between two lethal monsters, and I was trapped right in the middle of it. "We need to leave," I said suddenly, turning to Naomi. "Now." "Leave? The whole facility is in lockdown." "Exactly, everyone's focused on the creatures. It may be our only chance to get Ryan out of here." Understanding dawned in Naomi's eyes. "You want to capture him, take him with us." "I want to save my husband," I corrected. "These people never intended to cure him. They want to study him, weaponize what he's become." "And how exactly do you propose we find him, contain him, and escape a high-scepter government black site?" Naomi asked, though I could tell she was already considering it. I glanced around the room. Most of the staff were fixated on the security monitors, tracking the chaos unfolding below. No one was paying attention to us. "First, we find out where they keep the sedatives they used on him earlier," I whispered. "Then we get access to a vehicle. After that, we improvise." Naomi studied me for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "The medical supplies would be in the lab adjacent to the holding wing. Level 5. As for a vehicle," she glanced at the technician's badge clipped to his belt. "I think I know who might have access." I followed her gaze, understanding her intent. It wasn't a perfect plan. It probably wasn't even a good plan, but with my husband loose in the facility, gradually losing his humanity with each transformation, it was the only plan we had. "Let's go," I said quietly, as we slipped toward the exit. The monitors behind us showed new chaos erupting in another section of the facility. Something large and dark, moving at incredible speed through a corridor, followed by an even larger, fur-covered shape. The hunt was on, and we were right in the middle of it. Getting to the medical lab proved easier than expected. The facility was in such disarray that 2 unarmed civilians didn't register as a security concern. Most of the staff were either hunkered down in safe zones or actively responding to the dual containment breaches. The few we encountered in the corridors were too preoccupied to question our presence. The lab itself was deserted, its staff presumably evacuated. Naomi moved with unexpected efficiency, locating and pocketing several pneumatic injectors and vials of the sedative they'd used on Ryan. "Will this be enough?" I asked, watching her work. "It should be. The question is whether we can get close enough to use it." She hesitated, then selected a different vial from a refrigerated case. "This might help with that." "What is it?" "Synthetic pheromone compound. According to the label, it simulates the scent markers of the subject's pack." "Ryan doesn't have a pack." "No, but he has you." Naomi's expression was grim. "If there's any part of him still recognizing you as his mate, this might enhance that connection, make him more receptive to your presence." "Or it might make him view me as competition," I pointed out. "It's a risk," she acknowledged, "but right now I think we need all the help we can get." I couldn't argue with that. I watched as she filled a small spray bottle with the compound and handed it to me. "How do we find him?" I asked, pocketing the bottle. Naomi moved to a computer terminal, fingers flying across the keyboard. After a few attempts, the screen displayed a facility map with moving dots of various colors. "Tracker implants," she explained. "Everyone in the facility has one, including us." She pointed to 2 green dots in our current location. Those government agents put them in when they first examined us at the cabin. "And Ryan." She tapped a command and a red dot appeared on the map, moving rapidly through what appeared to be utility tunnels on level 2. "He's heading for the surface," I realized. "So is the skinwalker." Naomi pointed to a yellow dot moving ahead of Ryan's marker. "They're both trying to escape." She tapped a few more commands and a new section of the map appeared, showing the facility's ground-level exterior. A vehicle depot was marked on the east side. "That's our exit point," she said. "Now we just need vehicle access." I thought of the technician's badge we'd been eyeing earlier. How are we going to get that? We can't exactly go back to the safe zone and ask to borrow it. Naomi's expression turned calculating. "No. But we could find another staff member with the same clearance level." Understanding dawned. "You want to steal someone's badge?" "I prefer temporarily borrow in an emergency situation," she replied with grim humor. "And not just any badge. We need someone with level 4 clearance or higher." As if on cue, an alarm blared from the computer terminal. The map flashed red, highlighting a section of level 3 where several dots were clustered together. "What's happening?" I asked. "Confrontation," Naomi said tersely. "Ryan and the Skinwalker have engaged security teams." She studied the map for a moment longer. "This is bad. They've got both creatures cornered in the east stairwell. They're preparing to use lethal force." My heart lurched. "We have to stop them." "Ryan isn't attacking anyone. He's hunting the Skinwalker. He's protecting people." Naomi looked skeptical. "Or he's acting on predatory instinct. Either way, we need to move now if we want to reach him before they execute both creatures." She was right. We had minutes, at most, before the security teams neutralized both escape threats with extreme prejudice. We left the lab at a run, following the facility map Naomi had downloaded to her phone. The route to the east stairwell took us through increasingly chaotic corridors. Emergency lights pulsing, alarms blaring, and staff running in controlled panic toward designated safe zones. At one intersection, we nearly collided with a security officer hurrying in the opposite direction. Naomi reacted with surprising speed, driving her shoulder into the woman's solar plexus as she rounded the corner. The officer went down with a startled grunt, and before she could recover, Naomi had relieved her of her sidearm and access badge. "Sorry," she told the winded officer. "Emergency situation." "What the hell? Naomi?" I hissed as we continued running, leaving the dazed officer behind. "Since when do you assault federal agents?" "Since my academic career imploded when a cursed artifact turned your husband into a werewolf," she shot back. "Besides, she'll be fine. And now we have this." She held up the level 4 security badge triumphantly. We reached the access door to the east stairwell just as another alarm sounded, this one a pulsing, high-pitched tone I hadn't heard before. "What's that?" I asked, breathless from our sprint. Naomi's expression tightened. "Kill order authorization." She swiped the stolen badge through the reader beside the door. "They're going to terminate both subjects." The door unlocked with a metallic clunk. Beyond it, we could hear shouting, the rapid deployment of tactical teams, and beneath that something else, a deep, rumbling growl that raised the hair on my arms. "Ryan!" I pushed through the door, Naomi close behind me. The scene that greeted us was pure chaos. The stairwell was a multi-level concrete shaft, industrial and stark. 2 tactical teams had established positions, one on the landing above us, one below, effectively boxing in their targets. And in the middle, locked in a lethal struggle that defied comprehension, were the 2 creatures. The skinwalker was like nothing I could have imagined. A constantly shifting mass of dark tissue, sometimes solidifying into recognizable shapes, a human arm, a face, animal features, before dissolving back into its amorphous state. Currently, it had formed something approximating a humanoid torso atop a mass of writhing tentacle-like appendages, allowing it to move with terrifying speed. And engaging it directly was Ryan, or the beast he had become. In his fully transformed state, he was magnificent and horrifying. Nearly 7 feet tall, his powerful frame covered in dark fur, he moved with a fluid grace that belied his size. His muzzle was pulled back in a snarl, exposing gleaming fangs, and his amber eyes burned with predatory intelligence. The 2 creatures circled each other on the landing just below us, neither giving ground. The skinwalker kept shifting, trying to find a form that would give it an advantage, while Ryan responded with lightning-fast adjustments to his attack stance. "Hold your fire," a commanding voice shouted from the upper landing. "Wait for the targets to separate." I recognized the speaker with a shock. Dr. Crane, whom we'd presumed dead. She stood behind the upper tactical team, looking relatively unharmed save for a nasty cut on her forehead and missing one shoe. Her appearance confirmed she hadn't been consumed by the skinwalker after all. "Dr. Crane?" I called out, drawing all eyes to us. "Don't shoot! Ryan isn't the threat here!" She jerked in surprise at my voice. "Mrs. Chen, how did you—" She shook her head sharply. "You need to leave immediately. We're preparing to neutralize both entities. Just the skinwalker," I countered. "Ryan is trying to stop it. Can't you see that? He could have attacked your people, but he's focused entirely on the real threat." Below us, as if to emphasize my point, the skinwalker launched a surprise attack, its form suddenly extruding sharp, bony protrusions that slashed toward Ryan's throat. He countered with shocking precision, batting the attack aside and responding with a savage bite that tore away a chunk of the creature's mass. The skinwalker made a sound, a high-pitched keening that hurt my ears, and retreated a few steps. To my shock, the wound Ryan had inflicted didn't heal. The creature seemed genuinely injured. "It's vulnerable to him," Naomi said, scientific interest momentarily overriding our dire situation. "Something about his transformed physiology counters its adaptive capabilities." Dr. Crane was watching the confrontation with intense focus, her earlier determination wavering visibly. "Stand by," she instructed the tactical teams. "Do not engage unless directly threatened." The skinwalker, perhaps sensing its disadvantage, suddenly changed tactics. It flowed up the wall like viscous oil, moving toward the upper landing where more potential hosts waited. Ryan reacted instantly. With a powerful leap that seemed to defy physics, he propelled himself up the stairwell, intercepting the creature mid-climb. His massive claws sank into its amorphous form, dragging it back down. But the skinwalker was quicksilver fast. wrapping undulating appendages around Ryan's limbs, trying to immobilize him. They crashed onto the landing below us in a tangle of fur, claws, and writhing darkness. The tactical teams adjusted their aim, tracking the rolling battle but unable to fire without risking hitting both targets. I could see Ryan was winning. Despite the skinwalker's fluid adaptability, it couldn't match his raw strength and predatory instinct. Each bite, each slash of his claws, removed material the creature couldn't regenerate. It was being whittled away, piece by piece. In desperation, the skinwalker attempted a new strategy. It suddenly released Ryan and flowed rapidly up the stairs, directly toward me. Time seemed to slow. I saw the creature rushing toward me, its form resolving into something with too many teeth and eyes that held a horrible intelligence. I saw the tactical teams pivot, weapons tracking but unable to fire with me in the line of fire. I saw Naomi reaching for me, too far away to pull me to safety. And I saw Ryan's expression change, the bestial fury giving way to something recognizably human. Recognition, fear, protective rage. He moved faster than anything that size should be able to move, overtaking the skinwalker in 3 bounding leaps. Just as the creature reached the landing where I stood frozen, Ryan slammed into it from behind, driving it against the concrete wall with bone-crushing force. The skinwalker made that terrible keening sound again as Ryan's jaws closed around what might have been its neck, his powerful teeth sinking deep. With one savage wrench, he tore away a critical mass of the creature's form. The remaining portion shuddered, tried to reform, then collapsed into an inert puddle of darkening tissue. Silence fell over the stairwell. Ryan stood over the defeated skinwalker, chest heaving, muzzle dripping with an oil-like substance that might have been the creature's blood. Slowly, he turned toward me. Those amber eyes locked with mine. I saw intelligence there, recognition, and something else, a question, a plea. "Ryan," I whispered. "It's me. It's Elizabeth." He took a step toward me, massive form still tensed for battle. Another step. I was aware of the tactical teams adjusting their aim, of Naomi tense beside me, of Dr. Crane watching with clinical fascination. None of it mattered, only Ryan. I reached slowly into my pocket and withdrew the spray bottle Naomi had prepared. Under the watchful eyes of a dozen armed personnel, I spritzed the pheromone compound on my wrists and neck. The effect was immediate. Ryan's nostrils flared, and a different sound rumbled from his chest. Not a growl, but something more complex. His posture softened, the predatory tension giving way to something almost gentle. "That's it," I murmured, taking a cautious step toward him. "You know me. You saved me." He lowered his massive head, bringing those amber eyes level with mine. Up close, the details of his transformation were even more shocking. The way his skull had completely reshaped, the intricacy of the musculature beneath his fur, the deadly perfection of his fangs and claws. He was a perfect predator, designed by whatever force drove the curse to be the ultimate apex hunter. And yet, looking into those eyes, I still saw my husband. I raised my hand slowly, palm out, an offering rather than a threat. For a breathless moment, Ryan simply looked at it. Then, with aching gentleness, he pressed his muzzle against my palm. A collective gasp went up from the watching personnel. I heard Dr. Crane murmur something that sounded like, "Extraordinary cognitive retention." "I'm going to help you," I promised Ryan softly. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Those intelligent eyes studied me. Then he nodded. A distinctly human gesture from his transformed body. Moving slowly, telegraphing every action, I withdrew one of the sedative injectors from my pocket. Ryan tensed slightly at the sight of it, a low rumble building in his chest. "It's okay," I soothed. "This will help you. Help us get you out of here." He studied the injector, then me, then deliberately tilted his head to expose his neck, offering me access to the vulnerable area. Tears pricked my eyes at the level of trust that gesture represented. With steady hands, I pressed the injector against his fur-covered neck and triggered the mechanism. The sedative hissed into his system. Ryan shuddered once, then his massive form began to sway. I caught him as he collapsed, or tried to. His transformed body was far too heavy for me to support, but Naomi was there suddenly, helping me ease him to the floor as the sedative took effect. Dr. Crane approached cautiously, the tactical team still covering us with their weapons. "That was incredibly reckless," she said, though her scientific curiosity clearly outweighed her censure, "and absolutely fascinating. He recognized you completely, even in this state. The implications for cognitive retention during transformation are—" "Save it!" I cut her off. "We're leaving, now, with Ryan." Crane raised an eyebrow. "Are you? And how exactly do you plan to transport and contain a fully transformed werewolf? Where would you take him? What happens when he wakes up?" Valid questions all, but I wasn't backing down. "That's our problem. But we're not leaving here to be your lab rat. Mrs. Chen, be reasonable. Your husband just demonstrated unprecedented control during transformation. He could be the key to understanding this condition, to developing a cure." "A cure you'd then weaponize," Naomi interjected. "We've seen your research, Doctor. The military applications you're so interested in." Crane's expression hardened. "This is a government facility. Dr. Chen is infected with a pathogen that makes him an extreme public safety risk. You are in no position to make demands." "Actually," I said, an idea forming, "I think I am." I gestured to the inert mass that had been the skinwalker. "Ryan just eliminated a threat your entire security team couldn't contain. He did that while maintaining enough cognitive function to recognize and protect me." "Your point?" Crane asked, though I could tell she already saw where I was heading. "My point is that my husband is valuable to you. As a research subject, yes, but also potentially as an asset." I met her gaze steadily. "You let us leave with him, give us the resources to safely contain and transport him, and in return, we agree to share our observations about his condition with your team, remotely, on our terms. And if I refuse? Then you've got a PR nightmare on your hands. A rogue government agency, kidnapping and experimenting on an American citizen. I'm sure the media would have a field day, classified or not." It was a bluff, and not a particularly good one, but Crane had to consider the possibility that we documented our experience here somehow, left evidence with outside parties in case we didn't return. She studied me for a long moment, calculating odds and options. Finally, she sighed. "I can provide a specialized transport vehicle and a secure containment unit for your property in Sacramento. Beyond that, you're on your own. And I'll expect weekly reports on Dr. Chen's condition." "Monthly?" I countered. "And we control what information we share." Crane's lips thinned in annoyance, but she nodded curtly. "Done. But Mrs. Chen..." Her expression turned grave. "If your husband loses control, if he kills again, that's on you, and we will be forced to intervene, permanently." The threat was clear. I nodded my understanding, then turned my attention back to Ryan. The sedative had him in a deep slumber, his massive chest rising and falling steadily. Even in this monstrous form, I found myself reaching out to stroke his fur, a gesture of comfort more for me than for him. "He'll begin reverting to human form soon," Crane informed us, checking her watch. "The transformation typically recedes about 6 hours after sunset." She gestured to the tactical team. "Prepare the modified MCV for transport, and get a medical team in here to secure that." She pointed to the remains of the skinwalker. As the facility personnel hurried to comply with her orders, I knelt beside Ryan's sedated form, reaching for his massive paw and holding it between my hands. "We're going home," I told him softly, hoping some part of him could hear me through the sedative, "and we're going to fix this, I promise." Naomi placed a hand on my shoulder. "It won't be easy," she warned quietly. "The containment, the research, finding a cure, if one even exists." "I know," I acknowledged, "but I'm not giving up on him." I looked down at the creature that had been Ryan Chen, brilliant anthropology professor and my husband of 7 years. Despite the monstrous transformation, I could still see him in there, still feel our connection. Whatever it takes, I vowed, I'm bringing him back. The journey home was surreal. The specialized transport vehicle turned out to be a modified medical containment van, its interior fitted with a reinforced glass enclosure. Ryan remained sedated for most of the trip, his transformed body gradually shifting back to human form as dawn approached. By the time we reached our house in Sacramento, he was fully human again, pale, exhausted, but recognizably my husband. The transition left him unconscious, his body requiring time to recover from the massive physiological changes it had endured. With Naomi's help, I carried him inside, past the police tape still marking our house as a crime scene, past the bloodstains on the dining room floor, where Mr. Abernathy had died. We settled him in our bedroom, cleaned the worst of the filth from his body and covered him with warm blankets. Then we waited. Ryan finally woke late in the afternoon, his eyes fluttering open with reluctant consciousness. For a moment he simply stared at the familiar ceiling of our bedroom, as if unable to process how he'd gotten there. Then awareness flooded back, and with it the horror of remembering. "Elizabeth?" His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "What happened? How am I here?" I explained everything. The facility, the skinwalker, his remarkable display of control during transformation, our negotiated release. As I spoke, his expression shifted from confusion to grim recognition, to a haunted despair that broke my heart. "I remember," he said when I finished. "Fighting that thing. Protecting you." He looked down at his human hands, turning them over as if expecting to see blood or claws. "But I also remember, before that, the people I killed." "That wasn't you," I insisted, reaching for his hand. He pulled away. "It was. That's the worst part. I was aware the entire time, a passenger in my own body watching He shuddered. "I can still taste them, Elizabeth, still hear their screams." I had no response to that, no comfort I could offer that wouldn't sound hollow. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "Now we figure out how to manage your condition while we search for a cure," Naomi replied, practical as ever. "Dr. Crane is having a secure containment unit delivered later today, basically a reinforced panic room for the basement. You'll be able to lock yourself in before sunset, and if I break out? If I kill again?" "You won't," I said firmly. "You've already shown you can maintain some control during transformation. That control will only grow stronger." "You don't know that." "Actually, we do," Naomi interjected. "The research from the facility showed a direct correlation between cognitive retention and transformation frequency. Each time you change, the human mind adapts a little more, learns to work with the transformed state rather than being overwhelmed by it." Ryan seemed to absorb this, though the haunted look never left his eyes. "And a cure?" Naomi and I exchanged glances. "We're exploring several possibilities," I said carefully. "The silver treatment mentioned in historical accounts is our most promising lead, but it carries significant risks." "I'll take those risks," Ryan said immediately. "Whatever it takes to end this nightmare. I can't live with more blood on my hands." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of his suffering. I knew then that, despite my hopes, there would be no long-term management of his condition. For Ryan, the only acceptable outcome was a cure or death. Over the next week, our house transformed into something between a research lab and a prison. The promised containment unit arrived, a reinforced steel chamber built into our basement, complete with surveillance cameras and automated sedative dispensers. Each night, Ryan would lock himself inside before sunset, and each night I would watch on the monitors as my husband transformed into the beast, his body contorting through that agonizing metamorphosis. But Naomi had been right about one thing. With each transformation, Ryan retained more of himself. By the fifth night, he was able to communicate in simple ways while transformed, responding to questions with nods or gestures, even writing crude words with a specialized reinforced stylus we provided. Meanwhile, I threw myself into researching the silver treatment. Through Naomi's academic connections, we obtained historical accounts of similar cases, most ending in tragedy, but a few suggesting successful interventions. The Bavarian case from 1887 provided our template: colloidal silver administered orally during the waning moon phase, when the curse's grip was supposedly weakest. The timing couldn't have been better, or worse. The waning moon would begin in 3 days, but my own symptoms had started. I'd hidden them from Ryan and Naomi at first. The fever, the heightened senses, the strange dreams. But the night I woke up with blood on my pillow from where my canines had elongated and cut my lip, I could no longer deny what was happening. The scratch on my shoulder had infected me after all. "We need to prepare 2 doses," I finally admitted to Naomi as we worked in our makeshift lab. "I'm changing too." Her face paled, but she didn't waste time with platitudes or panic. "How far along?" "Early stages. Sensory changes, minor physical alterations. Nothing like what Ryan experiences yet. The next full moon is in 10 days, she calculated. That's when your first full transformation would occur. Then we have to act now, for both of us." The silver solution was deceptively simple to prepare, but terrifying in its implications. Colloidal silver, refined to its purest form, suspended in a delivery medium. According to our research, it needed to be administered at the exact moment between human and wolf, the transition point where the curse was most vulnerable. For Ryan, that meant catching him at moonrise as his transformation began. For me, with my infection still dormant until the full moon, it meant taking the treatment preventatively and hoping it worked without a triggered transformation to target. The night finally arrived. Ryan was calmer than I'd seen him since this all began, a man facing either salvation or execution with equal acceptance. "If this doesn't work," he said as I prepared the first dose, "if I become violent or the treatment fails—" "Don't," I interrupted, unable to hear whatever contingency plan he was about to propose. "Elizabeth, listen." He took my hands in his, the silver solution gleaming between us in its glass vial. "If I die tonight, you need to take your dose immediately. Don't wait. Don't risk becoming what I've become." I nodded, tears burning my eyes. "It's going to work, but if it doesn't, it will." I pressed my forehead against his. "And if not, we face whatever comes together." The sunset approached with merciless precision. We moved to the containment chamber, now modified with medical equipment to monitor Ryan's vitals during the treatment. Naomi would administer the solution while I remained outside the chamber, a precaution in case the treatment failed and Ryan's transformation triggered an uncontrolled response. The first spasms hit him as the sun dipped below the horizon. I watched on the monitor as his body began its now familiar contortion, bones cracking and reshaping, muscles bulging beneath stretching skin. "Now," I instructed over the intercom, and Naomi plunged the needle into Ryan's arm, delivering the silver directly into his bloodstream as his transformation accelerated. The reaction was immediate and horrifying. Ryan's back arched off the table, a scream tearing from his throat that transformed midway into an inhuman howl. His skin turned a sickening gray where the silver entered his system, dark veins spreading outward like lightning across his transforming body. "It's killing him!" Naomi shouted, backing away as Ryan convulsed violently, his body caught between forms, half man, half beast, and suffering beyond imagination. I moved without thinking, overriding the security lock and rushing into the chamber, despite Naomi's frantic protests. The smell hit me first, burning flesh and something else, something ancient and wrong being seared away. Ryan's eyes found mine as I approached, amber fire fading to familiar brown, pleading silently even as his body continued its violent rejection of both curse and cure. "I'm here," I whispered, taking his partially transformed hand in mine, ignoring the claws that cut into my skin. "Fight it, Ryan. Come back to me." His entire body went rigid, a final spasm lifting him completely off the table. Then, with a shuddering exhale, he collapsed back down, body rapidly returning to human form, the transformation reversing itself in a fraction of the time it usually took. For one terrible moment, I thought we'd lost him. His chest didn't move. No pulse visibly throbbed in his throat. Then he gasped, chest heaving as he drew in a desperate breath. His eyes flew open, normal brown eyes in his normal human face. "Elizabeth?" His voice was hoarse but unmistakably his. No growl, no animal undertone. "I'm here," I said through tears. "Did it work? Are you—" "It's gone," he whispered, wonder breaking through the exhaustion. "I can feel it. The hunger, the rage, the pressure behind my eyes. It's all gone." Relief flooded through me, so powerful I nearly collapsed beside him. He was cured. The silver treatment had worked, burning away the curse at the moment of transformation, but my joy was short-lived. "Your turn," Naomi said softly, preparing a second dose of the silver solution. I stared at the gleaming liquid, remembering Ryan's agony just moments before. Without an active transformation to target, would the silver simply poison my system? Or would it find the dormant infection and burn it out as it had done for Ryan? There was only one way to find out. "Do it," I told Naomi, rolling up my sleeve. The needle slipped into my vein and the silver entered my bloodstream like liquid fire. Pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced radiated outward from the injection site, stealing my breath, my voice, my ability to think beyond the agony. Through tear-blurred vision, I saw Ryan struggling to rise, reaching for me even as Naomi held him back, telling him I needed to fight this alone. The burning sensation spread, seeking out every cell that had been altered by the infection. I could feel it working, scouring my system clean, but the pain was unbearable, beyond human tolerance. As darkness crept in at the edges of my consciousness, I had one final, terrible realization. The treatment was working too well. It wasn't just eliminating the curse. It was eliminating me along with it. My last thought, before unconsciousness claimed me, was simple and bitter. We had found our cure, but it had come too late for both of us. I woke to the steady beep of hospital monitors and Ryan's sleeping face beside my bed, his head resting uncomfortably against the edge of my mattress. Sunlight streamed through half-drawn blinds, illuminating his familiar features. Peaceful, in sleep in a way they hadn't been since this nightmare began. My movement must have disturbed him because his eyes fluttered open, confusion quickly giving way to relief so profound it transformed his face. "You're awake," he breathed, reaching for my hand. "They said you might not." His voice broke. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. The treatment?" I managed, my throat painfully dry. "It worked, for both of us. But the silver concentration nearly killed you." His fingers tightened around mine. "Your infection wasn't as advanced as mine, so there was less for the silver to target. It went after healthy tissue instead." I processed this, taking inventory of my body. I felt weak but whole, with no trace of the feverish symptoms that had heralded my impending transformation. "It's over then?" I asked. "Truly over?" Ryan nodded, tears filling his eyes. "The curse is gone. Naomi's been running tests non-stop. There's no trace of the pathogen in either of our systems." Relief washed through me, followed by an unexpected wave of grief. We had survived, had found our cure, but at what cost? Mr. Abernathy, the homeless man, the teenage couple, the man walking his dog, all dead, all innocent victims of a curse neither of us had asked for. "What happens now?" I whispered. Ryan's expression darkened. "I've given Dr. Crane the formula for the treatment. In return, she's agreed to classify the deaths as attacks by an unidentified animal, now neutralized. Legally, I'm clear." He swallowed hard. "But the rest of it," I understood. Legal exoneration couldn't erase the memories, couldn't wash the blood from his conscience. "We'll get through it," I promised, though I had no idea how. "A day at a time." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes, the shadow of guilt that might never fully dissipate. A week later, we returned home, to the house where it had all begun. The bloodstains had been professionally cleaned, the damaged furniture replaced, all physical evidence of that horrible night erased. But some marks couldn't be removed so easily. Each night I would find Ryan sitting alone in the dark, staring out at the woods behind our house. Sometimes I'd hear him whisper names, reciting them like a litany, a penance, a prayer for forgiveness that would never come. The silver treatment had cured the curse of the Lycian stone. It had restored our human forms, eliminated the threat of further transformation, but it couldn't heal the deeper wounds, the psychological scars, the moral injury, the knowledge of what we had been capable of when the beast took control. 3 months after our ordeal, I found Ryan in our garage, engine running, eyes closed as carbon monoxide filled the sealed space. I managed to save him, but the attempt spoke volumes about the pain he couldn't escape. We left Sacramento after that, abandoned our careers and our home, seeking a fresh start far from the memories that haunted us. We told ourselves it was a chance to rebuild, to heal, to find meaning after horror. But some nights, when the moon is full, I still catch Ryan staring at it with an expression I can't quite name. Not longing exactly, but something complex and troubled. And sometimes in my dreams I run on 4 legs through endless forests, tasting freedom and power I've never known in waking life. The curse is gone. We are human again. Fully and completely. The blood tests confirm it. The monthly check-ins with Naomi verify it. The absence of transformation proves it. Yet sometimes when Ryan doesn't know I'm watching, I see him flex his hands as if expecting claws to extend. Sometimes I find myself scenting the air, momentarily confused when my human senses detect nothing unusual. The silver burned away the infection, cured the physical manifestation of our curse. But part of me wonders if something of the wolf remains, not in our blood or bones, but in our memories, our instincts, our awareness of what we once were. And on the darkest nights, when guilt keeps Ryan pacing our new home like a caged animal, I wonder if we made the right choice, if the silver truly saved us, or if it simply trapped us in human forms with the memories of monsters. Because the worst part wasn't finding my husband eating our neighbor. It was discovering that somewhere, buried beneath civilization and conscience, a part of me had envied his freedom.